Hi, welcome to another video. So, over the past few weeks, I have reviewed a bunch of models on this channel. Fable 5, GPT-5.6, Grok-4.5, Muse Spark 1.1. And the one question that keeps coming up in the comments is this: which one should I actually use? And my honest answer has always been, none of them. Or rather, all of them. Because if you have been watching my benchmark videos, you already know the pattern. There is no single model that is the best at everything. Fable 5 sits at the top of my leaderboard, but it is also the most expensive thing out there. GPT 5.6 is seriously good at backend and long horizon work, but frontend is still not OpenAI's strong suit. Grok 4.5 is crazy good value, but it is not an orchestrator. And Muse Spark has the best design sense I have seen, while being kinda average at everything else. So, today I want to show you a workflow that combines all of them. Fable 5 as the planner and orchestrator, GPT 5.6 or Grok 4.5 as the backend workhorse, and Muse Spark as the front-end and design model through OpenDesign. And the glue that holds all of this together is T3 code. Now, some of you might remember that I made a video about T3 code a while back when it was in alpha, and I was pretty harsh on it. It only supported codecs, adding projects was buggy, and you could not even see which files were being changed. I said it needed some more work, and to be honest, it has actually gotten that work. So T3 code is Theo's open source agentic coding interface. You can run it as a desktop app, or you can run it as a web server with a single command and access it from your browser, which means you can host it on a VPS and keep tabs on your agents from anywhere. And the big change is that it is no longer a codecs-only thing. It now supports basically all the major CLIs and subscriptions. So if you have a Claude subscription, you can use Fable 5 through it. If you have a codecs plan, you get the GPT 5.6 models. If you have a Cursor or Grok subscription, you get Grok 4.5. And you can also plug in API keys for things like the MetaModel API, which is how we will use Muse Spark. This is honestly the killer feature for me, because these days, most of us already pay for one or two of these subscriptions anyway. And instead of juggling 4 different terminals and 4 different apps, you get all of them in one interface, and T3 code just drives the CLIs underneath. On top of that, you still get all the good stuff from before, and it works properly now. You get worktrees, so every task can run on its own isolated copy of the repo. You get plan mode and code mode. You can set the reasoning effort per thread. You get actions, which are sets of commands that can run automatically when a worktree is created, like installing dependencies. And you get one-click commit and push. The file diffs also actually work now, which, thank God. So let's set this whole thing up and then build something real with it. First, the setup. You can grab the desktop app from the T3 code releases page, or if you want the server version, just clone the repo and run the serve command from there. I will be using the desktop app here. Once you open it, you add your project. And yes, they fixed the path issues from the alpha. You can just use the select directory option and it works. Then you go into the settings and connect your providers. For Fable 5, it picks up your Claude login from the CLI, so if you are already logged into your Claude subscription in the terminal, it just shows up. Same story with codecs for the GPT 5.6 models and the Grok CLI for Grok 4.5. For Muse Spark, I am adding my MetaModel API key manually. Meta gives you $20 of free credits when you sign up for the API preview, so you can try this whole workflow basically for free on the Muse side. And that is it. 4 frontier models from 4 different companies sitting in one sidebar. This would have sounded insane a year ago. Now, let me explain the actual division of labor here, because this is the part that matters. Fable 5 is the planner. If you saw my Fable video, you know that the thing that separates this new generation of models is the orchestration muscle. Fable can step up a level, break big work into chunks, spin up subagents, and manage the whole thing. It is also the most expensive model on the board at $10 input and $50 output per million tokens. So, the trick is to use it where it produces few tokens but a lot of value. Planning and review. You do not let Fable write 10,000 lines of code, because that is how you end up broke. You let it think. GPT 5.6 or Grok 4.5 is the backend implementer. And this is genuinely a pick-your-fighter situation. In my testing, GPT 5.6 Sol scored a perfect 10 on my agentic finituning task and the hard math question, and it is seriously good at long horizon backend work. Terra at $2.50 input and $15 output is the balance pick if Sol feels too pricey. But Grok 4.5 is the value monster. It is $2 input and $6 output, and the token efficiency is the real story. On the coding evals, Fable burns around 7 million tokens per task, while Grok gets the same work done with around 2 million. That works out to around 31 cents per task versus around $2.75 for Fable. So, for the grindy implementation work, Grok is really hard to argue with. The one thing to remember is that Grok is not an orchestrator, but in this workflow it does not need to be, because Fable is doing the orchestration for it. That is kind of the whole point. And then Muse Spark handles the front end through OpenDesign. If you saw my Muse Spark videos, you know this model is genuinely special at one thing: visual work. It replicates designs while keeping the visual DNA intact, and it can even cut assets straight out of a reference design and reuse them in the output, which is honestly insane. It is also cheap at $1.25 input and $4.25 output. But, and this is important, Muse Spark is really bad at file awareness. In my testing, it did not look at existing files before writing, and when I ran it in parallel sessions, it happily clobbered everything. So, the rule in this workflow is simple. Muse Spark stays in its lane. It gets its own work tree, it only touches the front end, and it never runs at the same time as another agent in the same files. If you follow that rule, it is amazing. If you do not, it will eat your codebase. Okay, enough theory, let's build something. I'm going to build a small invoicing app for freelancers, dashboard, client list, invoice creation flow, and a backend with auth, a database, and PDF generation. Step 1 is design, and this happens in OpenDesign before I even touch T3 code. I have talked about OpenDesign in my workflow video, but the short version is that it is where I think through the interface before any agent writes code. And now that Muse Spark is on the API, you can point OpenDesign at it as the design model, which is exactly the combo I hinted at in my Muse Spark 1.1 video. So in OpenDesign, I describe the app and give it a couple of reference screenshots of dashboards whose style I like. And because Muse Spark is doing the generation, the output does not look like the same generic AI slop with the same rounded cards and the same boring gradients. It keeps the hierarchy, the spacing, the density of the references. I design the dashboard, the invoice creation flow, and the client detail page. The 3 screens that matter. I am not designing every page. That would be overkill. I just need enough that the coding agents have a visual target instead of inventing a product from scratch. Once I am happy, I export the design context and the screenshots. OpenDesign packages this up nicely so you can just drop it into a coding agent. Step 2, planning with Fable 5. Back in T3 code, I create a new thread on my project, pick Fable 5, and switch to plan mode. Plan mode is important here because it stops the model from writing code, which is exactly what I want for my most expensive model. I give it the design context from OpenDesign and a description of what I'm building, and I ask it for a full implementation plan. The data model, the API routes, the auth flow, the edge cases, and, this is the key part, a breakdown of the work into independent chunks that different agents can pick up. And this is where Fable earns its price tag. It comes back with a plan that splits the work into a backend track and a front-end track with a clearly defined API contract between them. It defines the database schema, the route signatures, the response shapes. It even flags that PDF generation should be a background job so the invoice creation endpoint stays fast. This is the kind of thinking that the previous generation of models just does not do on its own. I review the plan, fix one thing I do not like about the schema, and approve it. Total Fable usage so far, a few cents, chef's kiss. Step 3, the backend. Now here is where T3 Code's worktrees come in. I create a new worktree from the main branch for the backend work. And I have an action set up that automatically installs dependencies whenever a worktree is created, so that just runs on its own. For the model, I'm going to use Grok-4.5 for the main implementation, because this is exactly the kind of well-defined grindy work where its token efficiency shines. I paste in the relevant chunk of Fable's plan, the schema, and the API contract, and tell it to implement the backend only. Not to touch anything front-end related. And it just goes. It sets up the database schema, creates the auth, implements the API routes one by one, runs a ton of commands, and writes tests along the way, because that was in Fable's plan. It is fast too, around 80 tokens per second, so you're not sitting there watching a spinner. If you would rather use GPT-5.6 here, the flow is identical. Just pick Sol or Terra in the model dropdown for that thread instead. Honestly, for backend work with really gnarly logic, I would lean Sol. For everything else, Grok gets you 90% of the way there at a fraction of the cost. This is the beauty of having them all in one interface. It is a dropdown, not a migration. Then it is literally one click in T3 code to commit and push. And from there, you can deploy it wherever you like. I use Railway as usual, and the app just works. So let me give you my observations from using this stack for about a week now, because there are some things you should know. First, the cost profile of this workflow is really good, and that is kind of the whole point. Fable, the expensive model, produced maybe 5% of the total tokens, but had its hands on 100% of the architecture. The bulk tokens went through Grok at 31 cents a task, and Muse Spark at budget pricing. My whole invoicing app came out to less than what a single Fable-only session would have cost. And if you are on subscriptions rather than API, most of this fits inside plans you might already be paying for, which is even better. Second, the plan quality genuinely changes the downstream models. Grok with a Fable plan behaves like a different model than Grok freestyling. All the wonkiness I complained about in my Grok review, the getting stuck on hung processes, the bad task splitting, it just does not show up when the task boundaries are drawn for it. It turns out the previous generation models are excellent employees and terrible managers. Third, respect the Muse Spark containment rule. I tested what happens if you let it into a shared worktree, so you don't have to. It rewrote 2 files the backend agent had just finished without reading them first. Own worktree, front-end only, never in parallel with another agent on the same files. Follow that and you are fine. Fourth, T3 code itself has genuinely improved, but it is still not perfect. It is still a bit heavier on memory than something like Verdant, and the web server version still has no built-in auth, so put it behind a password if you host it. But the multi-provider support is a real differentiator now. Nothing else lets me run a Claude subscription, a Codex plan, a Grok subscription, and a raw API key side by side in worktrees like this. And it is open source, which I really appreciate, because that is exactly why it went from the buggy alpha I reviewed to this. And fifth, on the GPT 5.6 versus Grok 4.5 question, because I know that is going to be the top comment. My take is this: if your backend has genuinely hard logic, or you want that ultra mode subagent behavior as a backup orchestrator, go Sol. If you are cost sensitive or doing high volume implementation work, go Grok. And honestly, with requesty style fallback thinking, there is nothing stopping you from using Grok as the default and escalating to Sol only when it gets stuck. That is what I have settled into. So, the final stack looks like this: OpenDesign with Muse Spark for the design, Fable 5 in plan mode for the architecture and the review, Grok 4.5 or GPT 5.6 in worktrees for the implementation, all orchestrated inside T3 code on subscriptions you might already have. Best design model on design, best planner on planning, best value models on the grind, each model in its lane and the lanes actually connect. This is the closest thing to a proper AI engineering team that I have been able to set up so far, and it costs less than using any single frontier model for everything. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.